My sister's veil sparkled like stardust under the chandelier light, her face aglow with anticipation. The entire ballroom buzzed with excited whispers, cameras flashing, guests dressed in their finest. And then, in a moment that should have been drenched in pure joy, she locked eyes with me across the crowd, her smile shifting into something sharp and unexpected. She raised a glass and uttered a veiled remark that cut through me like glass splinters. Every eye turned my way. My heart seized, the world tilting off its axis. I never could have imagined that just moments later, the groom's confession would leave us all reeling in stunned silence. The calm before the storm. Growing up, my sister Rachel had always been the spotlight in our family, a natural performer brimming with grace and charm. I, on the other hand, was her polar opposite, quieter, more introspective, content to linger on the sidelines while she commanded the stage. Our parents doted on Rachel from the moment she aced her first dance recital, to the day she graduated at the top of her class in fashion design. I admired her accomplishments, even envied her easy confidence, but for the most part, I was happy to celebrate from my vantage point in the wings. Still, beneath that veneer of sisterly affection, I sensed an undercurrent of competitiveness. Rachel seemed obsessed with being the best. At times, it felt like even I was an object to outshine. It wasn't malicious exactly, more like an unspoken tension that simmered whenever we were in the same room. But on the day of her wedding, I truly believed she would set aside old rivalries to share her special moment with me, free from any pettiness. I was about to find out how wrong I was. Her wedding was a spectacle of modern romance, towering centerpieces of white orchids, an outdoor ceremony drenched in golden sunlight, and a ballroom reception that looked ripped from the pages of a bridal magazine. The groom, Martin, was a tall, thoughtful guy with a warm laugh and an easygoing nature that contrasted sharply with Rachel's perfectionism. They seemed an unlikely pair at first, but if there was one thing Rachel loved more than shining in the spotlight, it was being adored by someone who saw her as flawless. I arrived in a deep red bridesmaid's gown, hair in a sleek updo, determined to support her every step of the way. My instructions had been clear: keep the children from fussing, ensure the bridesmaids march down the aisle at exactly the right tempo, and above all, avoid overshadowing Rachel. Not that I ever tried. Even if I had, no one could overshadow my sister on her big day. The ceremony itself was perfect. Rachel floated down the aisle, a vision of grace and beauty, while Martin waited at the altar, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. She made her vows in a trembling but unwavering voice, and he responded with a tenderness that made everyone swoon. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause erupted like thunderous waves. I felt my throat tighten, tears gathering, happy tears, for the sister who had found her fairy tale ending. Then came the reception, a luxurious feast of shimmering decor, gourmet cuisine, and a live band that serenaded us with jazz renditions of pop classics. Guests circulated through the room, offering Rachel compliments on her dress, her floral arrangements, the artistry of the entire spectacle. I flitted from table to table, greeting cousins, old friends, and random plus ones. Everyone remarked how radiant Rachel looked, how well the day had gone. Yet in my heart, I felt a subtle pang of sadness. She had hardly spoken to me since the ceremony ended, too busy soaking up the crowd's admiration. Maybe we'd get a moment of sisterly closeness later, I reasoned. Little did I know how that closeness would come in a form I never anticipated. The shade at the toast. Halfway through the reception, the MC announced it was time for speeches. Martin's best friend delivered a heartwarming tribute, mixing humor with heartfelt anecdotes from their college years. The bridesmaids offered short, sweet toasts. I stayed quiet, expecting to speak last, or maybe not at all. I didn't want to impose. Rachel was a woman of many words and strong opinions, so I assumed she'd handle her own speech with gusto. But when Rachel stepped forward, glass in hand, the entire ballroom hushed, anticipating a cascade of romantic, grateful words. She thanked her parents, praised Martin, and even called out a few key friends for their unwavering support. I hovered near the side, smiling in pride, the warmth of the champagne shimmering through my veins. Then she turned her gaze in my direction, a faint smile curling her lips. "And to my sister," she said, voice bright. "We may not see eye to eye on everything, but I appreciate, well, your efforts to support me today." An uneasy giggle rippled through the crowd. My heart pinched. Her tone was too sweet, edging on condescending. I forced a polite smile, waiting for her to pivot back to typical wedding banter. Instead, she continued. "You see, my sister here has always been the quiet one," Rachel went on, content to drift from job to job, never quite sure where life was taking her. But at least she made it here tonight without a major mishap, so that's something. Cheers to that. Tension snaked across my shoulders. My cheeks burned hot as scattered laughter wafted through the room. Many guests, uncertain whether to laugh or cringe, settled for a nervous chuckle. Rachel's words stung. I'd gone through a tough period of career exploration, yes, but I was hardly aimless. Her jab felt like a humiliating spotlight, shining on my insecurities. I swallowed hard, trying not to show how deeply her remark lanced me. Rachel clinked her glass against the microphone, amplifying the ring across the hall. But in all seriousness, she added, I truly hope my sister finds something she's passionate about one day. Maybe she'll even settle down too, if she can figure out what she wants in life. A hush fell. I couldn't move, pinned by her saccharine-laced pity. If I spoke up then, I would disrupt her wedding. If I stormed out, I'd look like the dramatic one. So I remained rooted to the parquet floor, heart pounding. My nails bit into my palm, the sting grounding me in a moment that felt surreal. Rachel ended her toast with a flourish of gratitude to Martin, and the crowd politely applauded. The music resumed, chatter filled the air, and I stood there, reeling. Shaken by her words, I slipped outside to the terrace. The cool evening air was a welcome relief, a contrast to the stifling tension inside. Beyond the wrought iron railing, city lights shimmered like scattered diamonds. My mind buzzed. Why would she say that in front of everyone? Was it petty sibling rivalry, or something deeper? All around me, wedding guests laughed, drank, and danced with abandon, completely oblivious to the knot in my chest. I fiddled with the edges of my satin gown, wishing I could vanish. My phone buzzed with a text from our cousin Jade, who'd witnessed the entire speech. Ignore her. She's always overshadowing people. I know it hurts, but don't let it ruin your night. I read and reread Jade's message, tears pricking at my eyes. If only it were that easy. I'd grown used to Rachel's subtle digs, but never had she so blatantly belittled me in front of an audience. Sadness clashed with anger, tangling into a knot of confusion. This was supposed to be her day of joy. Why drag me down for no reason? Amid my turmoil, I heard a soft footstep. Turning, I saw Martin, my brand new brother-in-law, standing quietly, hands stuffed into his pockets. He wore an expression of concern. The lively music from the ballroom drifted through the open door behind him. Hey, he greeted softly. You okay? I hesitated. Martin and I had always gotten along well enough, but we didn't share a deep bond. I'm fine, I lied, plastering on a wan smile. Just needed a breather. He nodded, stepping beside me at the railing. I'm sorry about the speech, he said. That was unexpected. I had no idea Rachel was going to say those things. I forced a shrug. It's not your fault. She's your wife. Maybe she felt she had to prove something. I don't know. It's complicated. Martin's gaze flicked to me, then to the cityscape. She's under a lot of stress, he began. Family expectations, professional achievements, it's always been that way. But that doesn't excuse humiliating you. His voice was quiet but firm. I'm going to talk to her. My heart panged with gratitude, but I also felt a flicker of defensiveness. I don't want to cause a bigger scene at the wedding. It's her big day. He sighed. I know. But some things need to be addressed. Don't worry, I'll be discreet. We stood there in companionable silence, the chatter from inside muffled. Despite the swirl of my hurt, I felt a small measure of comfort in Martin's empathy. At least someone recognized the blow I'd just taken. Unraveling secrets. I re-entered the ballroom soon after, determined not to slink away in defeat. If my sister noticed me, she made no move to apologize or engage. She seemed too busy twirling on the dance floor or posing for photos with friends. I kept my distance, not trusting myself to remain calm if we spoke. The night pressed on, overshadowed by tension. Waiters served the main course, a delicate fillet of fish on a bed of sautéed vegetables. I picked at my plate, appetite lost. Martin had vanished, presumably scouring the crowd for Rachel. My aunt and uncle made small talk with me, valiantly ignoring the awkwardness. Across the room, our mother looked troubled, but she too said nothing, as if unwilling to disrupt the wedding day facade. Finally, the bandleader announced the next set of toasts. Apparently, Martin wanted a moment to speak. Confusion rippled across the room. It was unusual for the groom to give a second speech after the bride's toast. My heart thudded in my chest. I suspected this was related to the scene on the terrace. Rachel, perched at the head table, folded her arms with a faint frown. Martin took the microphone, cleared his throat, and offered a polite grin to the guests. "Good evening, everyone. I know we've had some lovely speeches already, but if you'd indulge me, there's something important I want to say." Low murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rachel looked uneasy, her eyes flicking between Martin and me. I almost felt sorry for her. Whatever he was about to say, it clearly wasn't part of her carefully orchestrated plan. Martin glanced at Rachel. "My wife is many things: talented, strong, passionate, determined. But there's also a side to her that's been overshadowed by wedding stress. She's said and done some hurtful things tonight, specifically to someone I care about, my new sister-in-law." My breath caught. A hush fell over the crowd. Rachel paled. I locked eyes with Martin, heart pounding. Was he going to publicly call her out? That might escalate the tension beyond repair, overshadowing the entire wedding. But Martin, measuring his words carefully, continued. "The groom's unexpected revelation. Rachel and I both come from families with high expectations," Martin said, his voice echoing in the hushed hall. "It's easy to feel pressured into being perfect, into believing we have to measure up or surpass everyone around us. But that pressure can make us lose sight of what's important: love, respect, empathy." His gaze swept the room, then settled on me. "I've gotten to know Rachel's sister over the past couple of years, and I've seen someone who's resilient, passionate, and supportive, even if her path in life looks different from Rachel's. And that's okay. Each of us carves our own way." My hands trembled in my lap, a swirl of emotions flooding me. Gratitude for Martin's defense warred with embarrassment at being singled out again. Martin's voice grew tighter. "But there's something else I want to share tonight, something that might put everything into perspective." He paused, glancing at Rachel, who looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. "A few weeks ago, I learned that Rachel has been struggling with the idea of meeting everyone's expectations. She's been battling anxiety, worried she's not enough, fearing that if she's not perfect, she'll lose the admiration of the people she loves." A ripple of shock coursed through the guests. My mother gasped softly. Our father's brow creased in confusion. Rachel stared at Martin, silent tears forming in her eyes. It was clear she hadn't wanted him to reveal this so publicly. Martin pressed on, gentler now. "She confided in me that the pressure to always outperform had left her feeling raw, uncertain. Sometimes, when we feel insecure, we lash out at those closest to us. And that's not right." He took a steadying breath. "Tonight, I watched that happen with her sister. So if you're wondering why I'm speaking up now, it's because I love Rachel. I want her to face her anxiety openly. And I want her to know that we don't expect perfection, we expect honesty." The entire ballroom vibrated with an unspoken tension. Half the guests seemed moved by his confession, while others wore stunned expressions. Rachel's tears slipped free. She lowered her gaze, a flush creeping across her cheeks. I realized with a jolt that Martin wasn't just scolding her, he was trying to reach her, to show her that she didn't have to carry the burden of perfection anymore. "You're enough, Rachel," Martin said softly, returning the microphone to its stand. "And your sister is someone you should celebrate, not diminish." When Martin finished, an astonished silence blanketed the hall. Some guests sipped their champagne in awkward fascination. Others exchanged uncertain glances. For a moment, it felt like no one knew how to respond. The typical rules of wedding etiquette had been tossed aside, replaced by something raw and real. Rachel rose from her seat slowly, tears still bright in her eyes. She looked at Martin, then scanned the crowd, obviously overwhelmed. Her gaze found me. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as though struggling for the right words. The hush stretched unbearably. Finally, she swallowed, speaking in a husky whisper. I never meant for my speech to hurt you," she said to me, her voice carrying through the microphone's feed. I guess I was trying to mask my own fears by tearing you down. Because you always seem free, able to do what you want, without the same anxieties. And that made me jealous." My throat tightened. Rachel was jealous of me? The notion stunned me. Rachel was the shining star, the accomplished one, the sister who had all the pieces in place. How could she envy me? She inhaled shakily. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I've been carrying this fear that if I'm not the best at everything, I'll lose the love and admiration of everyone I care about." I know that doesn't justify what I said. I'm sorry. The hush continued, thick with a swirl of emotions. Tension, regret, empathy, and curiosity all warred in the eyes of onlookers. My cheeks were hot, my body trembling from adrenaline. Then, despite the swirl of embarrassment, I stood, smoothing my gown. If she could speak openly, I could respond. It's okay, I said, voice shaking. Not that it doesn't hurt, but I understand now. I never saw how much pressure you were under. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel overshadowed by my freedom of choice. Her lips curved in a trembling smile. Don't apologize, she whispered. You did nothing wrong. Someone in the crowd let out a shaky laugh, breaking the tension. A smatter of applause followed, uncertain but earnest. It wasn't the typical joyous wedding ovation, but an acknowledgement of two sisters forging an emotional truce in real time, in front of everyone. Attempts at normalcy. After Martin's speech and Rachel's tearful confession, the wedding took a surreal turn. The band resumed playing a slow jazz tune, and some guests filtered onto the dance floor, their footsteps tentative. Others lingered at their tables, talking in hushed tones about the personal drama they'd just witnessed. My parents looked shell-shocked. My mother dabbed at her eyes, while my father stared into space. Rachel drifted through the crowd, offering small smiles and waves to guests who approached her with worried or sympathetic expressions. Martin stayed by her side, hand protectively on her back. Periodically, her eyes flicked toward me with remorse and relief intertwined. I stayed near the fringes, unsure how to transition from such an emotional display back to the typical wedding frivolity. My Aunt Jade, who'd texted me earlier, sidled up. She placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. That was intense, she murmured. But I'm proud of you, for standing your ground and accepting her apology. I nodded, throat tight. It's a lot to take in, I admitted. I never realized she felt that insecure. Jade squeezed me gently. We all have hidden struggles. Sometimes they come out in the most awkward ways. Then she offered a bright smile. Now come on. You deserve a glass of wine or two. Grateful for the friendly gesture, I let her steer me toward the bar. Wine in hand, we found a quiet corner near the lavish dessert table, where miniature tarts and sugar-dusted pastries tempted guests. I nibbled on a chocolate truffle, trying to calm my frayed nerves. Over the top of the display, I watched Rachel and Martin greet well-wishers. His words hung over the evening. Some part of me wanted to collapse in relief. I'm not worthless, I'm not overshadowed, she's just been scared. Another part bristled with frustration. Why did she have to lash out so cruelly, especially on her wedding day? Nevertheless, the wedding reception soldiered on. People danced. They raised glasses in toasts that lacked the sting of Rachel's initial dig. By the time the cake was cut, a towering confection of buttercream ruffles, some measure of normalcy had returned. It wasn't the carefree celebration Rachel had surely envisioned, but it was still a moment of closure. We all watched them cut the cake, arms interlinked, leaning into each other with private whispers. Despite the drama, they looked in love. The morning after. The next morning, I woke to the hush of dawn in my small apartment, my bridesmaid's gown crumpled over a chair. My phone was flooded with texts, from Jade, from mutual friends, from some sympathetic relatives. Everyone had opinions on the wedding meltdown. A few complained that Rachel ruined her own day. Others admired Martin's bravery. Some wondered if I was okay. I scrolled through them, feeling a mixture of exasperation and gratitude. Then I stumbled upon a message from Rachel. Hey, I know last night was intense. Thank you for letting me apologize. Could we meet today? I really want to talk. My stomach tightened. Did I want to see her so soon? My emotions were still raw. But I also sensed that if we didn't address everything now, the tension might linger for years, souring our relationship. So I fired back a tentative yes. We agreed to meet at our parents' house, since Rachel and Martin planned to drop by to pick up her leftover wedding supplies. The drive there felt surreal, my mind replaying the events, the humiliating toast, Martin's shocking reveal, Rachel's tearful apology. I pulled into the driveway, noticing Martin's car parked behind my father's. I braced myself before heading in. Inside, the living room was littered with wedding remnants, half-filled boxes of decorations, spare floral arrangements wilting in vases. My father busied himself in the kitchen, making coffee. My mother arranged leftover programs in a neat stack. Rachel was perched on the couch, still wearing the faint traces of leftover mascara. Martin stood behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. When Rachel saw me, she rose, beckoning me closer with a fragile smile. "Hey." I nodded back. "Hey." My parents stood awkwardly, as if debating whether to leave us alone or join the conversation. Finally, Martin cleared his throat. "Let's, give them space," he suggested. My mother and father took the hint, retreating to the adjacent sunroom. Martin lingered, but stepped a few paces away, rummaging through boxes as a pretense. Rachel gestured for me to sit. After a beat, I did, heart thrumming. "So," I said softly, "how are you feeling?" She let out a weary laugh. Exhausted. Embarrassed. Relieved. All of the above. Her eyes flicked to her wedding ring, twisting it anxiously. I can't believe Martin blurted everything out like that, but maybe it was for the best. I nodded, fiddling with the hem of my sweater. "I'm sorry you felt that kind of pressure," I said, sincerity weaving through my voice. "But do you realize how bad what you said about me sounded? In front of all those people." She swallowed. "I do. It was inexcusable. I was resentful. You might not see it this way, but in my eyes, you always had this freedom I never allowed myself. You worked odd jobs, traveled, tried different things. Meanwhile, I was chasing a rigid path, terrified that if I messed up, everyone would stop applauding." I blinked, trying to comprehend her perspective. "You think my life is easy? I'm uncertain most of the time, worried about making rent, about finding stability. There's fear in that too." Her gaze dropped. "I know. I guess I never recognized that your path had its own challenges. I was too focused on winning at everything to see that. That's why, last night, I lashed out. I wanted to reassert control, prove to everyone how perfect I was. But Martin told me after the fact that it just made me look cruel." My chest tightened with empathy. "Look, Ratch, I don't want to keep rehashing it. Let's just find a way forward. I forgive you. You're my sister." Relief flooded her features, and tears glistened anew. "You have no idea how grateful I am. I promise, I'm going to get help for my anxiety. I've scheduled an appointment with a counselor. I don't want to keep living like this, hurting the people I care about." I reached out, squeezing her hand. "That's good," I said softly. "I'm here for you. But please, no more public shade throwing, okay?" A watery laugh escaped her. "Deal." Rebuilding bridges. The days that followed were filled with reflection and reparation. Rachel and Martin jetted off for their postponed honeymoon in Europe, leaving a swirl of gossip and half-answered questions among the wedding guests. I tried to distance myself from the speculation, focusing instead on the new equilibrium Rachel and I had found. She texted me from Paris with pictures of the Eiffel Tower, silly selfies of her and Martin sampling macarons. Each message carried an undertone of gratitude and warmth. For once, she wasn't bragging about how perfect everything was. She was simply enjoying the moment. It felt like the first step toward a healthier dynamic between us. When they returned, Rachel kept her word and started counseling sessions to address her anxiety and perfectionism. She confided in me that she was learning about the root causes, our upbringing, external pressures, her own harsh self-criticism. For my part, I opened up about the struggles I'd faced, the sense of never being good enough, the fear that I'd become the family failure. We discovered layers of misunderstanding that we had built up over years of silent assumptions. Meanwhile, Martin's role in this new chapter was one of quiet encouragement. He insisted that it wasn't his goal to humiliate Rachel with his speech, but to keep her accountable. He wanted their marriage to start on a foundation of honesty, not illusions of perfection. Their bond grew stronger for it. I watched them navigate spats and laughter with a vulnerability I'd never seen in Rachel before. Within a few months, the wedding meltdown became less of a scandal and more of a family anecdote, an intense turning point that forced open lines of communication. Every so often, though, I'd recall the hush in that ballroom, the shock on everyone's faces, the sting of Rachel's words. Healing from that kind of public humiliation took time, and I occasionally felt flickers of resentment or embarrassment. But whenever those emotions threatened to resurface, I reminded myself how far we'd come. A second celebration. About a year later, Martin and Rachel threw a small, intimate dinner to celebrate their first anniversary. It was a stark contrast to their opulent wedding, just close family and a few dear friends, gathered around a rustic wooden table in their cozy apartment. Candles flickered, and the aroma of home-cooked lasagna wafted through the air. I arrived with a bottle of wine, uncertain if the tension of that wedding day would haunt the festivities. But the moment I stepped inside, Rachel greeted me with a genuine hug. She looked healthier, lighter, freed from the weight of constant performance. "Thank you for coming," she murmured, guiding me toward the living room. "And for everything this past year." I squeezed her hand. "You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me." Martin ambled over, giving me a friendly grin. "Hey sis. Good to see you." He brushed tomato sauce off his apron, looking every bit the domesticated husband. "Dinner's almost ready." Our parents were there too, sipping sparkling cider in the corner. Dad gave me a thumbs up, while Mom patted the seat beside her on the couch. It felt surreal to be in this setting, the same family, but with a calmer kinder undercurrent. No illusions of a grand event, no pressing need to appear perfect. As we tucked into the meal, Rachel stood to raise a glass. My stomach clenched reflexively, memories of her previous toast flickering through my mind. But her expression held only warmth. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she said softly. "Martin and I made it a whole year, through thick and thin, big events and small annoyances." A ripple of laughter circled the table. "I also want to thank my sister," she paused, meeting my eyes. "For teaching me that love doesn't hinge on perfection, and for believing in me when I struggled to believe in myself." Emotion clogged my throat. The sincerity in her words banished any lingering dread. Around the table, the rest of the family beamed, offering a gentle applause. Rachel finished, "Here's to growth, second chances, and continuing forward, together." I lifted my glass, blinking back tears, and clinked it against hers. "Cheers," I whispered. That moment was everything the original wedding toast should have been: honest, heartfelt, and genuinely celebratory. Life seldom hands us neat narrative arcs, but in the span of a year, my relationship with Rachel had transformed from simmering rivalry to mutual empathy. The humiliating moment at her wedding felt both distant and strangely crucial, like a catalyst that forced us to face what we'd ignored for too long. I learned that people can appear confident yet harbor deep insecurities. I also realized that quiet struggles can fuel cutting words, especially when masked by the desire to maintain a perfect image. It was a lesson in empathy. If I'd understood her vulnerabilities sooner, maybe I would have approached her differently. Of course, part of me still wished that meltdown had never happened, that I hadn't been publicly shamed. But in the grand scheme, that painful experience spurred an honesty between us that might never have surfaced otherwise. And ironically, Martin's speech, though jarring at the time, revealed a truth that set us free from the shallow smiley facade we both tolerated for too long. At times, I replayed the mental image of Martin's face as he stood at the microphone, gently but firmly calling out his new wife. I remembered the shock, the hush, the flicker of raw panic in Rachel's eyes. That was the moment everything shifted from a typical wedding reception to something far more intimate, a messy, vulnerable unveiling of secrets and pain. Unorthodox as it was, it became the foundation for real reconciliation. Epilogue, a new kind of sisterhood. Now, looking back on that night, I think about how quickly the illusions we build can shatter. For so long, I assumed my sister's success was built on unwavering confidence. She, in turn, assumed my attempts to find myself were just a carefree frolic, leaving her behind to shoulder the burden of being the best. We both carried illusions, none of which matched the complex, real versions of ourselves. We didn't come out of that wedding unscathed. Our family had plenty of gossip to sift through, and we had emotional bruises to nurse. But we emerged with a deeper understanding of each other. Yes, it took a meltdown at the world's most inconvenient moment, but maybe that's just how family works sometimes. We hurt each other, we lay our burdens bare, and if we're lucky, we find a path to forgiveness and acceptance. Rachel still wrestles with anxiety, but it no longer defines her. She's poured her energy into a healthier approach, balancing her design career with therapy, letting herself enjoy life's imperfections. We talk more often now, and our conversations are genuine, no more passive-aggressive jibes or forced politeness. She asks about my current projects, supports my pursuits, and never implies that my path is lesser simply because it's unconventional. As for me, I remain a bit of a wanderer, trying out new opportunities, forging my own idea of success. Yet now I do so without feeling overshadowed by her brilliance. I know that my worth isn't measured against her achievements, and she recognizes that my journey doesn't reflect poorly on hers. When Martin and Rachel talk about starting a family someday, I imagine being the quirky aunt who visits with a new adventure story each time. I imagine a household where love outstrips judgment, where the children see two sisters who might be different but always have each other's backs. I can't say I'd recommend a wedding meltdown as the ideal method of family bonding, but in our case, it was the spark that lit up truths long kept in the dark. The shade Rachel threw my way, answered by Martin's compassionate confrontation, shattered the polished surface of a single day, only to pave the way for genuine connection over a lifetime. If I could speak to that younger version of me, standing humiliated in the wedding ballroom, I'd say, hold on. The pain is real, but so is the growth waiting on the other side. Because sometimes, it takes a raw, awkward moment to break down years of guarded illusions and set us on the path to real healing. In the end, we discovered something we both needed desperately: the freedom to love each other without the weight of expectations. And though it came with heartbreak, confusion, and a groom's shocking words, it led us to a better place. One where we can stand side by side, not as rivals, but as sisters who finally understand and accept each other for who we are.